which a whole bunch of decisions were made about policies and leadership and all sorts of other things. And that's what we're going to talk about, all sorts of things, this morning with Jim Wilson. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, how are you, Marion?
I am well.
I was so enthralled with your conversation there, I forgot I was even on the phone.
You were just listening on the radio. Fantastic. Hey, let's talk. I have three things I want to talk to you about today: leadership, policies, and getting stuff done down at Queen's Park. So let's start with getting stuff done, because it seems as though, did you actually take a walk across the lawns down at Queen's Park with a letter in hand yesterday?
Yeah, hand-delivered a letter and then had a media conference, and then we had a couple of scrums about it, I guess, the government house leader and I, Mr. Malloy from Waterloo. Certainly we see eye to eye on 8 pieces of legislation. 5 are government legislation, 3 are PC legislation, and I see no reason why we can't move ahead. We haven't been talking about jobs in the economy and the over 500,000 women and men that woke up this morning without a job. It's a horrible crisis. It doesn't get enough attention at all. It's got no attention here at Queen's Park. There are no bills of the 8 that we agree on, or any other government bills that deal with creating jobs or creating the atmosphere for jobs. You know, our youth unemployment is, as you know, it's twice the adult unemployment. It's worse. It's the worst it's been in 23 years I've been in Parliament. It's 14 to 16%, and we're not talking about that. We're talking about canning beds and Local Food Act and fairness in Ontario's construction industry. All important issues, but all social issues. None of them are economic issues. So Tim Hudak decided, coming out of our convention, we heard from our delegates from there were 900 there from across the province saying, well, you guys need to talk about jobs in the economy. So if that requires clearing the legislative deck here at Queen's Park, that's what you should do. And so that's what we did yesterday. And I did it in the morning with Mr. Hudak. Then the government, surprisingly, through question period, had no answer for us. I think they were caught off guard, or the fact probably is they have no economic agenda. So they were kind of hoping that they keep this place in paralysis, because we saw this game before, back on June 9th when we recessed for the summer. They blamed the opposition that nothing was getting done, and Wynne went into those by-elections saying, I need a stronger mandate because I can't get anything done at Queen's Park. And I went around the door-to-door saying, well, she doesn't even try. I mean, they have all kinds of tools as a government to get bills through. So yesterday, there's no more excuses for the government, but surprisingly, they spent all afternoon through to the evening with the media making up excuses of why now they can't agree with us to pass these 8 bills and get the decks cleared and talk about jobs.
So you offered to say yes to these 8 so that you can talk about something else, and so now there isn't a deal?
No, there's no deal. They want to talk again today. They like paralysis. It fits into their pre-election, and we expect an election could be any time. It could be this month, or it could be next spring. I think it's more like October, November. They'll have an economic statement that they have to do, what they call the fall economic statement, at the end of October, and they'll fudge the deficit numbers and probably use that as a jumping stone into an election.
But it won't be a confidence motion.
They don't have to do that. They can just say we're going to the elections. And part of their plan was the same script we saw which was a complete lie, we saw going into the by-elections, was Parliament isn't working. And every media outlet bought it, and I was the only guy going around saying, sorry. The only programming motion they did this year was back in budget time, February, March, with the NDP, and shut us totally out of any conversations, and never did talk to us again about getting things moving around here. So the fact of the matter is they like paralysis. They don't have an economic plan. They never have talked about jobs in the last 10 years. Wynne, because Mr. Hudak's taking the lead on it, pays lip service to jobs. But of the 5 bills that the government has, of these 8, none of them are to do with jobs. Secondly, they don't have any other bills that we could agree to, or that they even have put on the table that have to do with jobs. So we're daring them to come forward with an economic agenda that actually talks about the number one issue facing Ontarians.
Now, there's a lot of people and a lot of talk yesterday. It seems as though Kathleen Wynne was sort of caught off guard by the federal Conservatives yesterday when Jim Flaherty showed up with a big sack of cash for subways on a different route than has been proposed. Where do the PC stand on subways for Scarborough?
Well, we've always been, and Tim Hudak, the leader's been for 2 years. He was even ahead of council. At one time, we were almost lecturing Toronto Council to get their act together, and then they finally got their act together. And we're with them on the same route that they've agreed to now, and that the federal government has agreed to. So we were with Rob Ford through thick and thin on subways. And
careful there.
And Tim took the lead on that down here at Queen's Park. This bizarre announcement that was made by Minister Glenn Murray, who we call the Transportation Minister for Winnipeg, because he used to be the mayor of Winnipeg, why you would come out against council and now against the federal government, and why you did it 2 weeks ago when the federal government had given you a letter 4 weeks ago saying we need till September 30th to do our analysis. So he tried to get out ahead of them, kind of in a pig-headed style. He says he's not going to change his mind. I have a feeling the Premier will do a dressing down of that Transportation Minister at some point in public, because he's just way out of whack with what everyone's thinking.
Now, one of the things that I noticed yesterday as I was watching Jim Flaherty make the announcement, and Rob Ford being congratulatory to himself and to his council to a smaller degree, is that it just seemed like it's never ending election mode, and I know that you're in a minority situation at Queen's Park, and that, as you say, a writ could come down any minute. But what is going on with announcements coming from the federal government where Jim Flaherty's slamming the provincial government and Rob Ford is saying, "I made good on my promises. Here they are." Are we in never-ending election mode nowadays?
Yeah, I think we are. I think that's pretty astute of you in terms of there's a lot of competition for the limited attention span that the public has for politics, and that's probably what you're seeing. On our case, though, yesterday was a sincere effort to get this place moving and talking about jobs, particularly youth unemployment, and about our debt crisis and our deficit crisis. I mean, it'll go up again by another $2 billion next year, although it went down slightly in the the quarterly statement that the government made. But we're still spending $10.6 billion a year. Next year, we'll spend over $11 billion a year. It's the third largest ministry after Health and Education is the debt ministry. Most of that money goes to China or overseas, and it doesn't buy you anything. It just is interest on the debt that we owe, the $258 billion we owe. So we need to talk about that so that we have money in the future for senior services to children and health care and the like. We're running out of money to spend because we're spending so much on servicing our debt. So that's the other thing that we want to talk about, jobs, because if we get the economy moving again and we get people working, they'll pay income tax, and that'll give us more money to deal with our debt and deficit problem. But that's not the agenda of the government. So we're trying to seize the agenda down here and get them to turn around. And even if they get credit for bringing some economic bills forward, that's fine. I'm getting tired of going home every weekend and seeing all the unemployed people that I see far too often.
So you weren't home this weekend. You were in London this past weekend, talking with, you said, between 800 and 900 delegates to the provincial PC convention. Let's hear a couple of the things that were passed. And I know, and one of the questions I want to ask as a media person, completely self-interested in here, why were the media barred from the voting?
They were barred. They weren't barred from the they were barred from the policy sessions, which is normal for all of the parties, because that's our private time with our delegates who are elected in each of the ridings to come down to, in this case, London. And we want to have a frank discussion with them, and we don't want delegates or the politicians to hold back. And there's some pretty crazy policies that come out sometimes. So you know,
just never know what some of these guys are going to come up with.
Yeah, you're in the business. That would just be the lead, you know. And because we don't stage these things. I mean, they're 14 white papers that people were asked to read over the last year. The last one came out just about 3 weeks ago on northern economic development. And and they're asked to digest that 167 different ideas in those 14 white papers, and we tried to distill it. So we had lengthy sessions, and we had several going on simultaneous throughout the convention center and the hotels, and this follows on. I think we had 47 policy advisory committee meetings in the months leading up to the convention. Riding associations have had dozens and dozens of their own meetings discussing policy, and so we tried to distill all that in the weekend. I can't give you a summary yet because that will come out when we actually have a platform, final platform for the election campaign, which I said we expect pretty well anytime.
But you can tell me a couple of things, like
Sure.
Tell me about the College of Trades. Where do you stand on it now? Because I know you've been very vociferous about that.
Yeah, we have, in spite of the government appointing one of my former colleagues, Mr. Chibuchi, former social services vendor Mike Harris, he's now chair of the College of Trades. They're doing that to try and dissuade us, I guess, from continuing. We heard strongly from our delegates, and many of them are skilled tradespeople themselves, or small to medium contractors, people that are actually paying their new dues into the College of Trades. They're angry as can be. It's a layer of bureaucracy that is, you and I've expressed some pretty strong stuff about it on your show in the past when they were first developing it. It's just a layer of bureaucracy we don't need, and it's the union's way of taking over all of the training. And remember, this is a pool of about $200 million a year that's spread over community colleges and that. And our paper on the College of Trades, or on trades, calls for less of the unions taking over the direct those dollars, but our community colleges taking the lead.
And so is that the plan?
Colleges a lot more than I trust some of these unions who have other agendas, and God knows what they do with the money.
Is that the plan at this point, that eventually training for baby electricians and baby plumbers and baby welders and baby carpenters would be done by unions rather than done by Georgian College, for example?
That's what the College of Trades does. So they call it a college because it's taking over the role of many of our colleges. We want to go in the opposite direction. We don't think the government does a particularly good job at delivering programs. It's usually other people that do a much better job, and certainly the leaders, in fact, the leaders in North America are Ontario community colleges. So we want to see more of that. So we have a whole paper out on that. And of course, back to what we've been preaching for a long time to deal with the debt crisis in the province is we need a 2-year wage freeze to save $2 billion a year, just to give us that breathing space. So we need a wage freeze for myself, for politicians, and for all of the public service and broader public sector. That's doctors, nurses, police, fire, to give the taxpayers a break and to help us catch up on the books here. So that was a very strong policy that was endorsed.
Anybody suggest a 2-year fee freeze?
Fee freeze is...
I just renewed my driver's license.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you see the emails I'm getting on that, particularly from seniors. It's just angry as can be. And because no one's getting a wage increase except these public servants over the last few years. Most people are just keeping their head above water, and then the government comes along and takes more money. It's just been very, very unfair. And then we've had huge scandals. The waste here is unbelievable. I mean, even people that still sort of mention e-health to you and Orange and that, they can't even grasp when you're talking to them the actual extent of the money that's gone down sinkholes. Gas plants, people seem to understand that a little more, but it's in the billions and billions of dollars now, and probably will grow. We'll have another report from the Auditor General, the new Auditor General, expected any day, but it's probably closer to the end of October, on the actual cost of cancellation of gas plants. So things will get worse before they get better. So
if it is that we go to the polls sometime in the next 8 to 10 weeks in Ontario, the policies that you and the rest of the PCs are going to be coming forward with is 2-year wage freeze for civil servants, including ourselves, and abolishment of the College of Trades. Can you win on that?
Well, there'll be many more. But again, I'm not at liberty right now and I haven't seen all the, there were several policy sessions going on at the same time, so I haven't seen all the reports out of those, and we'll be putting it together in a comprehensive document that everybody can understand, and it'll cover more than just the sectors we've just talked about. But it will lead with jobs in the economy and with getting our finances under control, government living within its means.
And your leader will be Tim Hudak. That was not even up for, it was up for a question for about a second and a half.
Yeah, well, it's really, as I've said to you before, there's always been this disgruntled riding association down in London. 10
Just
people.
the one.
Yeah, just the one. And there's about 2 other people, and one of them happens to sit on our party executive, so I wish he would resign, who just have a bee in their bonnet no matter who the leader is. John Tory went through this with them. Ernie Eves went through this with them. Not so much Mike Harris. And Mike dealt with these things rather swiftly. I think Tim let this simmer a bit too long and didn't deal with the Randy Hilliers, and that's the fellow in the caucus, soon enough, and let the sniping go on. So he's learned, and he's dealing with it. He's dealt with it, and it was overwhelming. The media hype, and really it was media hype, and Tim kept saying that. He said, no, there isn't a real rift in our party. It's just a handful of people. It happens when people get disappointed after elections or by-elections. We shouldn't make such a big deal out of it. And it was really not surprising to me and many others, but I think surprising to the media, God bless them. They were there in droves like I haven't seen in 20 years. and the whole thing, as you said, took about 4 minutes, that one vote. Actually, the next vote, which I actually got up and spoke, was about whether our staff could actually sit on the Central Party executive. So that actually went on for about 25 minutes.
Longer than the discussion about Tim Hudak's leadership.
See a conflict that if some volunteer, like Joy in my Collingwood office there, Joy Park's been with me for 15 years. If she wanted to run it on her own time and volunteer, and they sit on Saturdays for the party executive, I certainly thought that she should be able to do that as a volunteer. We shouldn't tell people what they can do or not do after 5 o'clock.
And did that pass?
And it finally, it was, well, the way it was defeated. It was to stop them from doing that, and it was defeated. So they're now free as anybody else in Ontario that's a member in good standing to run for any of our executives.
So if I'm a betting woman, if I'm headed up to Rama this afternoon, am I betting on a vote in the next 8 to 10 weeks?
I'm quite sincere, and many of us around here are, in saying it could be any day. We do not see a substantive agenda at all from the Libs. They were caught flat-footed yesterday in terms of bringing anything substantive forward, so they spent, as I said, a good 7 or 8 hours, the second half of the day, after we did what we did, trying to explain now why they're holding up their own bills and why they have nothing to move on to. So we'll see what happens today. It's going to be an interesting day. But one of the planks that they wanted to use is places in paralysis. The Premier's been in 9 months of the bills that she wants us to pass. And by the way, Tim Hudak met with her 2 weeks ago at her request, and she handed him a list of these 8 bills. So we took the list of the 8 bills and put together an 8-page, what they call programming motion that says, on this date we shall do this, on this date it'll go to committee, on this date we'll do clause by clause, on this, and had it approved by the clerk, so it's all legal. Handed it to the government yesterday and said, look, this is what you asked him 2 weeks ago. You haven't even bothered to do it up in the legalese that need to be done up. We got our lawyers and the clerks to do it, and myself to write it with them, and here it is. Let's pass it today. And they spent the whole day, as I said, making up excuses now. Can't use us as an excuse anymore. We want to talk about jobs and the economy and helping the people of Ontario.
We will, we'll see. We'll see what happens next.
All right.
Jim Wilson is the member of Provincial Parliament for Simcoe Grey, also the House Leader for the Provincial Progressive Conservatives at Queen's Park. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
When we come back here on Georgian Bay Today, we will move from provincial to